Great to see everybody here today. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome again. I'm Michael Preston, Executive Director of the Joan Ganz Cooney Center, a research and innovation lab housed within Sesame Workshop in New York City. I'm thrilled to be able to gather all of you here today to discuss a topic that matters a great deal to our team, today's tweens and teens, whom we also call the missing middle, and how public media is uniquely positioned not only to support their learning and development, but also to involve them in shaping the future of our media ecosystem and civil society more broadly. Our team has had the privilege of working with colleagues from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting since 2020, and we're excited to share what we've been learning with you today. Before we jump in, a quick housekeeping note. We're offering 3 options for you to join in today's conversation. First, just the way you're doing right now, please use the chat feature to introduce yourself, your name, your station, your role. And if you're not from a station, welcome to you too, and wherever you're from. And also add any reflections during the conversation that you'd like as we roll along. Second, please use the Q&A feature, not the chat, if you have any questions, and then we'll work to answer them live in that space. Third, we will be convening tomorrow at 3 p.m. our peer learning community for public media stations. And we invite you to join us, whether you're a regular or if this is going to be your first time. And we'll share more information about how to do that at the end of today's session. Okay, back to the agenda. If you've been following our Next Gen Public Media Initiative, you will know that we've been focused on the idea of by, with, and for youth, an acknowledgement that the key to engaging young people is to include them, to give them a seat at the table. That's a core principle of inclusive design, of course, but it also reflects the participatory nature of today's media environment and, frankly, young people's expectations of the world we live in today. We're all familiar with the ever-expanding universe of media platforms, the novel and sometimes inscrutable ways they work, and their power to capture our attention and even change our behavior for better or for worse. But what interests us most is this participatory aspect of media experiences, the ease of content creation and distribution, the ability to interact directly with an audience, and especially what it means today to be a creator for an audience, and the sometimes blurry line between those two things, and also the challenges of media literacy when there's just so much content and from so many sources. Kids use media to do the things kids always do, to connect with each other, imagine, create, play, and learn. But this generation is the most connected to date, and they have the biggest platform available to them. Young people want to be heard and taken seriously. And we also know from Gen Z research that they are eager to lead. So what does public media have to offer in the media-saturated lives of today's teens and tweens? How can we meaningfully support young people and even include them in the work we do? How can we partner with them on this journey? We're called to understand the unique perspectives youth can bring to the broader public discourse, the stories they might tell that promote intergenerational dialogue, and how their voices can be an essential part of our civil society. It won't be a surprise to anybody here at today's event that our team are big believers in the power of public media to chart a course that's human-centered and specifically youth-centered. We've spent the past 3 years getting to know the public media community, discovering the richness of the work happening locally as well as nationally, often by, with, and for young people. We've shared our research findings and also helped to foster new ideas and new ways of working. Together, we've built a network of over 100 stations through our peer learning community, our workshops and events, and our support for new project ideas, including those of the 12 stations that participated in our accelerator last year. We feel hopeful that the outcome you see is a vibrant and collaborative network focused on tween and teen work in public media that offers multiple entry points for stations to learn, to share, and to get involved. Now, today we're excited to celebrate the release of our new report, Gen Z in the Room, Making Public Media by and with Youth for the Future. The report is based on in-depth interviews with public media youth project stakeholders from around the country and explores what they have learned from their efforts to engage and experiment with youth directly, offering promising strategies for serving and platforming this missing middle audience. We will also share our brand new station toolkit, which includes a wide range of resources for public media stations to make the case for tween and teen work, set a strategy that matches the station's priorities, and build a program on a solid foundation based on lessons and best practices from the field. Finally, we're excited to share that we'll invite Deb Sanchez from CPB to join our team for a conversation about what all this means for the future of how we can work to create content by and with youth for the future of public media audiences. To start off the event, before I pass the baton to my colleagues, I'd like to share a short video that shows what this work can look like in the system, highlighting projects from our cohort of 12 accelerator stations. Can we roll the video, please?
In 2022, the Joan Ganz Cooney Center and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting launched the Next Gen Public Media Accelerator Program. 12 stations from across the country were chosen to support the piloting, experimentation, and spread of youth-focused initiatives in the public media sector. In Las Vegas and Pittsburgh, student-led crews worked with seasoned professionals to design and produce new inclusive content.
It makes me want to pursue my career of being a journalist.
Hey guys, I'm Mahana and I'm here with Chris.
In New York, direct collaboration between public media and Gen Z content creators led to the production of several short films detailing their personal experiences.
After years of low self-esteem and letting the voice in the back of my head tell me I wasn't good enough or deserving of friends, I had enough. Something had to be done.
In Boston and Connecticut, podcasts, live events, and roundtables gave young people a platform to talk about issues that matter to them.
There's no reason I should have been in so many walkouts for gun violence and stuff like that. So I think the youth is doing their job. They're doing as much as they can.
In Arizona, Indigenous youth celebrated their heritage and identity with a radio show.
This grinding stone has been passed down from my great-great-great-great-grandmothers.
And in Washington, a video series produced with neurodivergent teens and teens with disabilities offered new perspectives on an often underrepresented community.
When I'm having trouble living independently, I can get help from my mom and my caregiver.
In Mississippi and Kentucky, talk shows provided teens and tweens a forum to demonstrate civic learning, leadership, and media literacy skills that allow them to participate in our democracy.
Because we are a small community, but that shows that we can do big things, you know?
In North Carolina and Minnesota, students created documentaries and PSAs surrounding the topics of teen mental health and comprehensive sexual education.
It's better to be educated than afraid.
And in South Carolina, high school sophomores and juniors created a safe, affirmative, and productive space to advance representations of Black girls.
When Black women and girls braid their hair, it is a part of a cultural tradition.
By giving the next generation of content creators a seat at the table, media fluency, and platforms to share their voices, projects that were part of the Accelerator program continue to develop innovative and unique youth-produced public media.
I'm so proud of all of us, and I can't wait to see where the program is going to go.
All that's left now is to see the future and to keep creating content.
That was amazing. Thank you so much to the stations who participated in this accelerator and our team who supported them. What a great reel that is. Just the right way to kick us off now. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our senior research fellows, Mary Madden and Elizabeth Rood, authors of the new report, Gen Z in the Room.
Thank you so much, Michael. What an amazing way to kick off this day, which is so exciting to us. You mentioned, this initiative has been 3 years going, and we have absolutely benefited from all of you in this room. So much of what we've done has been incredibly collaborative. And so we're really celebrating not just the release of this report, but marking the culmination of 3 years of work. And it's really exciting to think about what's next. So as you saw in the reel, the Accelerator cohort was amazing and gave us so much inspiration, really a front row seat to learn from youth media projects that were in their early stages. The interviews we did for the Gen Z in the Room report, by contrast, was with more seasoned program leads, those who have been shepherding their projects at their stations for anywhere from 2 years to 2 decades. And so that really allowed us to draw lessons and insights that are deeply informed by their experience. In addition, we were incredibly fortunate to speak with many of the youth alums from these programs. They are now, many of them, young adults and even older. And we were able to gain a better understanding of how their participation has really created lasting value in their lives. We were able to also get responses from them that dovetailed with what we were hearing from the program leads, and it really made this report the rich document that we hope you all find it to be. So this report is really the latest in a series. We have been putting out research initiatives from this report all across these three, from this initiative all across these 3 years. We have a variety of both research reports and more practical publications available on our website, all to help the public media field learn how to better serve these tween and teen audiences. Gen Z in the Room is specifically meant to be a companion to the Missing Middle report. So whereas the Missing Middle helped to identify the broad landscape of youth media practices where public media might strengthen their engagement with youth, this new report really zeroes in on the engagement that actually happens at stations in practice. And we're looking at what approaches tend to work well, where programs are housed and how they're funded, what staff learn from having youth at the table and literally in the room. We also learn about how former participants, with their uniquely informed perspectives, see the opportunity space for public media in the future. Next slide. So whose perspectives are represented here? And we can move to the, thank you. In total, we spoke with 30 stakeholders from a selection of public media programs that have included youth voices and perspectives in content and production. These were hour-long interviews that were conducted over Zoom, and it included 13 adult staff who were involved in leading the projects and 17 young adult alumni, ranging in age from 18 to 30. And while these findings can't be considered representative of all public media youth engagement work, the outcomes and lessons that have been learned here have been highlighted with particular attention to trends that we've been seeing in other aspects of our work. So we've had, in addition to these interviews, data collection done through landscape interviews, our station survey, and our program database. And then, of course, we've also been learning along the way from the PLC community, the accelerator stations, and research workshops that were combined with our youth fellowship. And finally, our consultation with CPB and our partners there was instrumental in helping us shape this work. Next slide. In particular, the collaboration that we did with CPB in shaping who we spoke to was especially important. So we really wanted to, in this sample, although it was small, make sure we could have as much diversity, both in terms of location, station size, and license type. And so you can see that diversity reflected here. We found that these programs were actually quite diverse in their practice, even though they were all sharing a commitment to centering youth voices as part of their programs. They had different methods of doing so. However, since we were prioritizing speaking to programs that had been around long enough to have alumni, the sample does skew a bit towards youth development programs. And all of these programs are serving youth, high school and middle school aged youth through educational programs, content, or highlighting young people's voices for a general audience. And I'm going to pass it off to Elizabeth to talk about some of the most interesting findings that emerged from this work.
Thanks, Mary. It is really exciting to see all of you here. Thanks for the tremendous turning out and enthusiasm for this work. I know for folks who've been doing this for decades now, the building momentum in the system for enthusiasm for youth work is really heartening. So thank you all for being here. Go ahead to the next slide, Leslie. The report is available now on our website. We'll be linking to it in a minute, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview of what is in it and how we have organized it. We'll be digging into some of the findings from it today, which are mirrored in the executive summary. So the executive summary has some very high level both insights and recommendations. So if you need to just get a little bit to get motivated or to take it to someone who has less time to read, that's a great resource to have available. Digging in more deeply into the chapters, we share a little bit more about the approaches that have been used across the system and some of the lessons learned. Part of what is most wonderful about our research is the opportunity to highlight the voices of people who've been doing this work and then also of the youth alumni. So you can see just incredible insights that they offer throughout it. Our presentation is really just going to be scratching the surface, so I do hope that you will go and dig into the report. Whether or not you are a GM trying to figure out how this work fits into your bigger station strategy, or you're a director of education trying to plan to develop a program, or you're a development person trying to figure out how do I talk about this with donors and with members so that people who are beyond our current donor base are also excited about this work. All right, next slide. As Mary noted, many of the project leads and alumni that we talk to come from youth development programs. And by this, we mean stations that are providing hands-on media making learning experiences to young people, where the priority is oftentimes what the young people are gaining. If we get amazing content from it, that's a bonus, but we're centering young people's experiences in this kind of work. But we knew that this wasn't the only kind of way that stations could think about engaging young people. And so we wanted to intentionally invite stations that had expertise in other approaches. And you can see here 4 of the high level approaches that we found as we talk to people. The first bullet of educational resources does include those kinds of youth development programs, but it also includes stations that are doing work for teachers, whether that be leading professional development on media literacy or creating curriculum that is aligned to standards that teachers can use in their classrooms to enhance learning experience, or field trips, things like that, where we're providing resources to young people and their teachers, but for the purposes of education. This approach tends to live in the education departments and in community engagement. The second bullet is maybe less common across the system, but we're seeing it as a very promising approach that is gaining traction. And that is to use the platform of public media to feature young people's stories or their perspectives for the general audience. This is a unique value that public media can provide to our communities. This approach often involves newsrooms or content teams that are focused on particular issues that matter to young people. The third approach that we found as we chatted with folks was inviting young people into station work so that we can learn from them. This could be in focus groups, it could be in advisory boards, all kinds of different ways that it gets structured. But the intention is to learn from them about their media engagement, about their preferences around platforms, and also oftentimes around culture. This is really important as we work to represent and be relevant to the full diverse communities that we serve. And then finally, many stations are focused on making sure that their staff reflect the communities they cover. And many of the youth projects we spoke to are focused on recruiting and supporting diverse young media makers. We're lifting up these 4 strategies because of the way they dovetail together, but also because of the ways that they support bigger station strategic work that is important for the long-term sustainability of public media. Next slide. All right, so as I said, the executive summary goes into 7 key insights and 4 recommendations, and we're going to highlight those for you here to get your appetite whet so you can go and dig in further. The first is about catalyzing change. One of the things that we were really interested in as we talked to projects was to hear about their goals and about the impact of youth work. We were really interested in the ways that youth projects have ripple effects across the station, sometimes things that were surprising or serendipitous. And that brings us to our first key insight. While there are definitely examples of youth projects that are fairly siloed or standalone, there is exciting evidence that youth engagement in stations can catalyze transformational work. Young people as digital natives have a lot to teach us about the seismic and fast evolving shifts in media engagement. What they can teach us can have a trickle up effect as we think creatively about reaching millennials and even their Gen X parents. Two of the really important things that we heard from the interviews. One, if your goal is to create content for younger audiences, you must invite them into the work or you will simply miss the mark. Similarly, if you're creating content on topics that matter to young people, anything from the pandemic to racial justice to climate change, you will be missing essential viewpoints if their voices are not included in your reporting and your perspectives. Finally, if we want to have youth projects support transformational station level goals, then part of what we were hearing from people is the importance of having the work be cross-departmental. Youth projects often do sit exclusively in education departments, but we're seeing that they are having greater impact when stations that are working across with marketing and development and content and news teams are working with the youth project work. Next slide. As I mentioned throughout the presentation, we've included quotes from interviewees, both adult professional staff and young alumni. The report is chock full of incredible insights, so please do go to it, but we're giving you a little taste here. This one here is connected to that idea of system transformation. We're trying to flip all our mentalities from we're a broadcast station that puts our stuff on digital and social media to we're a digital and social media station that puts our content as well on broadcast. That's where we see the future going. So that whole flip in terms of our production structure, our funding structure, the technology, it's very big. Next slide. The second key insight we want to offer is about intergenerational value of youth projects. As Michael mentioned in his introduction, the Next Gen Public Media Initiative has often been guided by the idea of content by, with, and for youth. One of the interesting findings from our research, however, is the power of that with part. A handful of projects that have been invested in creating content in partnership with young people, where the purpose is to reach a wide general audience. Some of these projects are fairly light touch in the ways that they work with young people, such as interviewing them for profiles or news stories, while others involve very robust advisory boards or even co-production of content with young people, where station professionals and youth are partnered for long periods of time to produce things to go out to a general audience. As we talked to people about this approach, we heard of the power of using the public media platform to share young people's stories with the general audience and the value of such cross-generational dialogue. We also heard both leads and alumni talk about the ways that incorporating youth voice can make stories more representative, more informative, and more nuanced. Next slide. The more often that general audiences hear youth voices integrated onto the air, the more producers start hearing this positive feedback about how great it is to hear young people. It's such a big ROI. Not only building the next generation of young people as a future audience, the current adult audience really wants to hear those youth perspectives and have more opportunities for intergenerational conversations. Next slide. A number of the project leads we spoke to referenced their station's deep commitment to strengthening staff diversity, recruiting people who reflect and represent the full communities that they serve. Youth projects at these stations were often recognized as a critical way of building connection to diverse communities. Oftentimes, communities that public media has struggled to engage. Projects that provide youth development training in media and technology, especially when they are involved in partnering with schools or community-based organizations that serve populations of young people who are underrepresented in the media fields, can be really critical to stations' DEI efforts. In the report, we talk in more depth about youth development career pathways and the ways that stations are thinking about from the ground level on up to a pre-professional way to work with young people. I encourage you to read those sections if you are interested in thinking more about youth projects that advance staff recruitment efforts. Next slide. But we'll leave you with this amazing piece of data from one of our interviewees. In the last year at our station, 4 program graduates have been hired as full-time staff members. That's not typical, but I think it speaks to the long-running support of our program. We've really tried to provide opportunities and career pathways for graduates who want to stay involved in this industry. People recognize the value of having graduates on staff. All right, back to Mary for the next set of insights.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That is such a powerful quote. And may all the programs result in such an amazing turnaround and bringing in new staff. That's awesome. So another set of really exciting findings we found was around young people's role in helping the digital transformation, specifically helping stations figure out how to innovate around platforms and reach. So hearing directly from the youth alums about their vision for the future of public media and where they see the unique opportunities. In particular, the nuances that they bring to understanding how Gen Z uses digital platforms differently when compared with older generations, and where they see the most exciting opportunities for creative engagement. So for instance, when it comes to social media, this was a surprise to us. Youth alums noted that there's really a disconnect in the ways that their stations tend to use social platforms compared to how their generation does. So they noted that their stations tend to use it as a marketing tool to promote existing content, but they don't necessarily view it as a space for original content creation and sharing like younger generations do. And so sometimes that would prompt some kind of misunderstanding, or in some cases, an opportunity for the young person to step in and create their own original stories or content for their social media channels. We spoke to youth alums, a few different ones who are running their own Instagram live shows or experimenting with providing complementary original content that supports other stories in their program. So kind of breaking out of this idea of thinking about social media only as a marketing tool. Then there's a whole collection of really fascinating quotes from youth alums around sort of norms on different platforms, understanding how they think about the role of the host, the different kinds of aesthetics that are unique to their generation, and the style that they see as particularly relevant to them. In particular, young consumers are really seeking out young creators like them, and this echoes the findings in our Missing Middle report. They get excited when they see either peers or near peers behind the camera and contributing to stories. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise, especially those of you who are involved in the public media TikTok community, that short form video and infographics really provide an opportunity to meet some unmet needs in the format of choice for younger generations. And we heard about that from youth alums repeatedly. Not that they think every public media station should jump on into putting all of their content onto short form video, but that there are ways to creatively create content that supports and helps to amplify other programming. So we have this next slide. We have this wonderful quote from a youth alum who says, when you look at more news stations, they're moving towards that short form content. It's a lot more reels on Instagram. You see their TikTok videos. You see them trying to adhere to the audience. It's 60 seconds, but packed with information and in a timely manner. That's really what Gen Z is looking for. Next slide. Then we have these fantastic quotes about the norms and the trends that young people are seeing. One of our youth alums says, young people just have more of an eye on the trends and topics that are popular at the moment, which come and go super fast. It's almost like our generation has its own set of inside jokes from the internet. Having young people creating media will naturally then draw other young people to that media because there's this language or references that we're interested in. And similarly, another alum said, I think that a lot of the stuff that's pitched explicitly to Gen Z and that is made by Gen Xers or Boomers is wildly inaccurate to our experience. So we heard about these ways in which young people can sort of sniff out when older adults are behind the wheel and young people aren't involved. And it speaks to what Elizabeth was mentioning earlier, that if you want to create content that's going to be relevant to this audience, that having young people involved is essential. Next slide. So at the same time, this desire for authenticity and challenging some of the existing norms can create frictions and points of friction within stations. And so one of the key tensions that emerged in practice, and something that we heard from both program leads and youth alums, was that although vulnerability in storytelling and sharing personal stories was a key feature of authenticity for their young contributors, that sometimes stations, when they're doing a story where they want to amplify youth expertise based on those experiences, can be problematic when those stories are related to personal challenges or trauma. So this was an area where we felt it was important to highlight that this can be a challenging space, and that Gen Z's desire to take a stance on an issue, to share those personal stories, can both bump up against journalistic norms of objectivity regarding current events. It can also put them in a vulnerable space. And so this is an area where we encourage particular care and also learning from peers in this space who have experience in handling these stories in a respectful way. Next slide. So this was a quote from one of our youth alums that speaks to this tension. Young people are oftentimes encouraged to make stories about familial trauma, familial history, very personal things. And they're less interested, the youth programs, in more traditional journalistic inquiry in the stories. I just definitely noticed that's a very strong trend in the stories that they accept and put out. Next slide. Another big surprise for us was the enduring value of broadcast as a medium. This is not something that we were expecting to come from these digital natives, but it makes sense when you think about the perceived legitimacy and known reach of this medium. So youth participants in these programs told us repeatedly, and program leads as well, that there was a disconnect between how young media makers consume content and how they want their stories that they work on distributed by stations. Some of this ties to the current state of digital distribution within public media, and that it is fairly limited. But currently, kids who are contributing to stories are much more excited when they hear their story on air. In terms of contributing to a portfolio, if students want to pursue a career in journalism, this is seen as more directly connected to professional development for them and for those that want to continue on that path. So we thought it was especially surprising and important to consider at this stage that young people do still value very much that broadcast opportunity. Next slide. One of our youth alums spoke to this challenge and said, their program has struggled with getting people's ears on what they make. They said, we have a pretty strong audience when it comes to adults that listen for the youth perspective when that goes on air. But otherwise, when it comes to listens on our podcast app or Twitter, we don't get anything. It's like really the conundrum. How do we get our work in front of people? So many programs are struggling with this as well. Next slide. Finally, funding challenges. We know many of you have come up against this. This was a very common theme, and I'm sure it does not come as a surprise to many of you. However, what we found that is, I think, of particular interest is that how stations position their youth work affects their funding potential and sort of the diverse array of sources that they're able to draw on. So youth development programs in particular tend to be funded differently than youth-involved station productions that have a wide reach. So it really gets to thinking about early on what you intend in terms of your distribution for the content versus focus on outcomes for youth. And that's really where some of this strategic alignment comes into play. Few stations are currently committing operating funds to youth programs, but those that are have a level of stability that allows them to maintain key staff members and create community. And so a key question moving forward is, if we know that there are all of these benefits to bringing youth to the table and getting them involved and supporting intergenerational perspectives, how do we leverage broader interest in the general audience to support that work? And I'll pass it back to Elizabeth to talk about implications.
All right. The next slide, Leslie. Thanks. So we have 4 high-level recommendations that are very meaty. And so while we're going to just talk about them really briefly here, they are things that we are hoping that you take to your teams and contemplate and talk about, because there is a lot to unpack here. Thinking about audience, thinking about program design, thinking about intention of the work. The first one related to all of those is about strategic alignment. And we know that these youth projects, particularly that are youth development type projects, can be incredibly impactful for the young people who are involved. Through these projects, young people can learn skills, they can gain role models and mentors, and they often speak, the young people we talk to, about the empowerment that comes from hearing their voices and their perspectives taken seriously. But youth projects can also be really impactful for adults in stations and for stations as organizations. As a society, as a public media system, we're undergoing tremendous change. And the insights that we gain from partnering with this diverse, digitally native generation can challenge our assumptions about the ways things ought to be and shift our thinking in ways that can really help us to adapt and to make sure that we are meeting this moment. This is why our first recommendation to stations is that we align youth project work to strategic priorities. Rather than it being a nice to have thing off on the side, how do we move it so that our youth programs are an essential component of driving some key part of station work forward, be that experimentation on platforms or changing of audience or diversifying communities that we are representing. Some way that it is tied to the work that you most need to do. With that, we know that leaders need to be championing this work, talking across our newsrooms and our marketing departments and our development teams and our education teams about why it matters that youth are part of station work, and having really clear, compelling case for this that can be brought not only to the internal organization, but also outside to funders, to donors, to board members, so that we're building a collective understanding about the power of centering young voices and perspectives in public media. Next slide. The second recommendation that we have is that there is a lot more that we can be doing as a collective to be figuring out where is it that we need youth angles. As we mentioned before, one of the parts of the research that we found most interesting was the idea of production that is with young people, but is for a general audience. There's a lot to be learned about creating content for tweens and teens, but what we were hearing back from people was that it actually is really valuable, as we said, to be creating these intergenerational opportunities. And this might be a lower, easier bar to jump into for many stations who are new to this work, to be thinking about this youth angle. And so with that, we want to just highlight that there are some stories that need youth angles more than others. As I mentioned before, if you were telling a story about, return to work and return to school after COVID, missing the youth perspective on that is missing something really essential. Whereas if you're talking about caring for elders, probably a youth perspective is not as essential on that. So some stories need that youth perspective more. It changes more when youth voice is part of the story. Similarly, part of what we know is that there are stories that young people are really interested in that are not as relevant to the general audience. So things like, is your dress code fair? That might be really animating to a 15-year-old, probably not as relevant to a 45-year-old. So thinking about the kinds of stories where we're matching young people's perspectives with the work that we want to be doing to be elevating what's really important is important. The final thing on this is that we know that not all stations are ready to go out and to start engaging young people. It takes a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of care to work with young people in a way that is respectful and is ethical and helps make very transparent to them what is going to happen with what they say, where they have agency to shape the message that they are putting out to you and whatnot. And so this is work that we are encouraging public media stations to take up and to start generating conversations, whether it is interviewing young people or inviting them in to advise on projects. There are ways or best practices around working with young people that stations can deepen. So that's the next recommendation there. Mary, back to you.
Great, thank you. And I will try to wrap up quickly here as I'm looking at the clock and realizing we want to leave room for our esteemed guests to comment on the impact of this work. So that leads to the third recommendation here, and that's about sustainable impact. Really, in order to do this work, not everyone will be able to invest in the high touch educational programs that result in content that's ready for wide distribution. Not everyone will be able to scale their programs up very quickly. And so part of what we've learned across these interviews and the larger work of the initiative is that there are lots of different ways to go about this work, and that programs that are able to figure out how to make it sustainable, even if it means adjusting the level of engagement and making it more lighter touch, but then to sustain it over time, really brings in benefits, both in terms of the consistency in the community, ability to recruit youth participants, involving them as mentors, et cetera. So having those light touch ways to get involved and stay involved. And we heard from stations that one station we spoke with found that some of their strongest stories that they were creating were those that were co-produced with youth, but they couldn't sustain it and they had to scale back to a youth advisory model, but that allowed them to keep their program going. And so that was a good choice and a good trade-off for them. Next slide. And finally, we really want to highlight how powerful youth input can be for increasing relevance to younger audiences, not just in one department of the station, but across the organization in all different kinds of work. Starting small, learning about youth expectations and preferences, creating connections to young people, even in small ways, can help to create this feedback cycle that will help you understand and anticipate how this audience can inform your work. Next slide. So we'll leave you with some questions, some starting questions that you might consider for those of you who haven't been working in this space yet. So these are specifically questions about some of this lighter touch activity of platforming youth voice for your work. So what kinds of public media projects are going to most benefit from youth involvement at your station? What sorts of stories and reporting look fundamentally different, as Elizabeth was talking about, because young people are participants in their creation? And how can stations lift up young people's expertise authentically, respectfully, and appropriately? And how does adding youth voice inspire financial support and sustainability for your audiences that appreciate having those perspectives on air? And with that, I will pass it over to our colleague Rafi, who's going to tell you a bit more about some practical tools that you can use to help deepen your knowledge and engagement with this work.
Thank you so much, Mary and Elizabeth, for this incredible work. My name is Rafi Santo. I'm a senior fellow at the Cooney Center and project co-lead with Michael Preston of Next Gen Public Media. Again, we encourage you, first of all, to check out the report and that link. If we can put the presentation back up, I'll walk you through a couple of ways to get involved as stations to bring this work home practically. We've done a lot of really amazing work in this report, and there's ways that you can get directly involved and bring this work into your station. So the first is to stay in touch, get updates about events, funding opportunities and resources. That link will be in the chat in a minute by signing up for our newsletter. We have a peer learning community that we mentioned at the top that Michael mentioned that is for stations. We meet every once a month, every third Thursday. The next one is tomorrow, and we're gonna have Elizabeth and Mary there to unpack this report and field a lot more questions live and have some interaction around it. So please do sign up if you're a station and join that community. And finally, the station toolkit, which I'll walk you through very quickly, that has tons of resources. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of them. We have, they can be found at toolkit.nextgenpublicmedia.org. Next slide. There are resources around setting strategy internally, meeting agendas and activities that you could run with your team, your GMs, your head of newsroom, your head of education. Next slide. We have a database of over 100 projects that folks in the field have submitted. If you have a project and you haven't submitted it, be in touch with us, but these are great inspiration for what this work can look like on the ground across the country. Next slide. We've got stories from practitioners, from you all, about how you've done this work in your own station. So not just what is the project, but a narrative around it and lessons learned. Next slide. And finally, there's a lot of very practice-based resources about how to build your program. You know, one-pagers or two-pagers on how to think about, you know, collaboration amongst young people and what's that spectrum, what's the more intensive and less intensive. So things like that. And we really encourage you to circulate those, bring them into your stations, think about what it means for your work as you build up your programs. So I'm going to hand it back now to Michael and Deb Sanchez from Corporation for Public Broadcasting, who's been our critical partner in this work. We hope to see you in some of the opportunities that we shared.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Mary and Elizabeth. That was a fantastic presentation. I just got, I was off camera and had a giant smile on my face the whole time. I'm really just so grateful for the work you two did. And Rafi, thanks for sharing all of the station capacity and network capacity building work. Hopefully people will come tomorrow to the PLC meeting, sign up if you haven't already. I'm sure some links will appear in the chat. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Deb Sanchez, Senior Vice President for Education and Children's Content Operations at CPB. Everyone here probably knows that CPB is just a big driver for this idea of using research and insights to drive innovation in the field. And so I thought it would be appropriate to close us out here to have her reflections on what we just heard. Deb, I'll just start with a big question. Since you're the person in my world who knows the most about the system, down to the station level, down to the people in the stations, what shifts are you seeing in the system right now?
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you to the entire team at the Cooney Center. And if all of the Cooney Center spaces were on screen when I said this, their eyes would be really big and they would smile. But as much as we've been immersed in this information for the past several years, it's always so impressive to hear it presented in a way that reflects our system and our work across stations, both TV and radio. And when we set out to do this work 3 years ago, I just have to say that we didn't want to approach it like, what's a big hit we could have for kids in this space, or what's something huge we could do to meet kids' needs where they are, without having such a foundational understanding of where we were as a system, where young people were themselves, where we've seen success, where we've seen things struggle, where we know we need to continue to work in the future. So that's what's behind this 3 years of work. And all of the reports really reflect the commitment from this team and from our team at CPB as well to pull together the best of the best here to help inform your work for the future, because we know that it's important. And I will say that at CPB, we're definitely seeing an increased interest in working and trying to meet the needs of young people in very different ways, depending on what works for either larger producers or smaller production houses or stations directly. So really thinking about what's the right approach to reach young people. So we're seeing more projects within projects that might address youth directly, and trying to include young people in a variety of ways across a project or across a program. We're also seeing how stations really are looking at these opportunities not just as ways to only increase their digital capacities, right? But also to tell stories that engage different audiences in their communities and reflect these stories in a way that's rich and meaningful for everybody in their community. And I think Elizabeth articulated this really well. When you're thinking about young people and wanting to include them in your work, it's finding that right space for them, right? And really not looking at them just as another consumer of content, but also a creator with you as you're building these narratives and these stories. And I mean, in the end, as we all know, the priorities around media literacy, around engagement in our country and becoming active and good citizenry, right? That being involved in telling stories that are rich and informative and true is good for young people as they grow and develop into adults. So, and we think public media is the right partner to help them grow into those future adults, which many of them are in situations where they're already required to act like adults in some cases. But we're just so excited about what we're seeing, and we're excited about the interest and excitement that we're seeing across the system. So thanks to this team and to our team at CPD as well for committing 3 years during a pandemic to get a lot of this work done. So thank you.
Thank you. One of the things we've talked about a lot is intergenerational dialogue and conversations, also partnership. The idea that stations at the local level have this wonderful capacity to create those spaces, like you mentioned, but also really offer something of value to young people around mentorship and pathways, both specific to the technical aspects of the work, but also storytelling and seeing future possibility for themselves. I was wondering if you might say some words about that local aspect and what it means to connect to communities in that way.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that actually, and it was really interesting to see through this work the value that still remains in this broadcast type programming. There's a lot of conversations in the system now about broadcast content and what does it mean and how do we effectively kind of, how are we on all platforms? How are we serving many in many places? And I think that the opportunity for our existing audience and this new younger audience to find place together in our broadcast programming or in their voices in the content that people are listening and watching on public media is really heartening and hopeful in a lot of ways. I think that, as I guess I'm a Gen X or 50-something-year-old. I have 2 kids in this age range, and and plenty of others that are in our orbit. But it is important to hear from these young people and to listen to and respect their perspectives. And and also as an adult, I could say this, to also help provide them with support they need to tell their story even better, right? So there's like a real win-win sometimes in this partnership around intergenerational opportunities. So I take heart in the fact that we're a very trusted brand in the lives of young people and families, and that trust is making making a big difference in this intergenerational opportunity that I think we're seeing across public media as well.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick question, Deb. Thank you for that. What was like if there was a finding that was most kind of intriguing or surprising to you, or maybe left you with a question that you hope to answer sometime down the road? Do you have one of those?
Well, certainly, I will say, honestly, it's the value of broadcast with young people, and trying to kind of unearth that a little bit more. Is it what has become known to young people through their time and their experience with public media when they were kids, and knowing the value that they placed on that show, perhaps? I'm speculating, right? But for us, it was an interesting observation that came through this report, that broadcast carries this, existing, like, authentic experience for young people. And I don't know if it's just, it validates them in a different way. So you could put a lot of opinion, and young people have the ability to publish anywhere they want, right? I mean, social media gives them that opportunity to put their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas out in multiple places. But there's something about the public media experience that has given their perspectives greater validation, perhaps. So I'm curious about learning a little more about what that value really equates to. So that was kind of one surprise.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating too. And if I remember correctly from our missing middle report from 2021, a lot of kids identified PBS rang a bell in public media when shows that they loved were suggested, like Wildcrats. Somehow there's an enduring relevance to this day, and they have those happy feelings. So yeah, we'll see. Okay, I think we're at time now. So Deb, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your whole team for your support and guidance throughout this whole project to date. And thanks to our team for presenting all the amazing work you've done the last, I don't know, it's 3 years now, but now as we wrap up, I encourage everybody, maybe if we could have that last slide back with the links. I encourage everyone to go download and read this report, share it with your colleagues, friends, and neighbors. Sign up for the PLC. If you want to keep talking, if you want to meet other like-minded colleagues, join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. There's a link there as well. So the links are all appearing in the chat now, hopefully. I see Colin put them in a little while ago. So please join us and keep talking to us. We're so excited to hear what you have to say. Congrats. Thank you, Cooney Center team, for producing this event with us, and see everybody soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye all.
Thank you.